What's up, friends? So I have kind of a spicy video to make today. I'm kind of like canceling myself a little bit, at least my past self. So this is kind of awkward. Like, I definitely don't have to make this video. There's nothing like on the internet that could be dredged up and used against me related to this subject. I'm making this video only because I think this is a conversation we need to have. Especially, we're having kind of a moment. You're so loud, and you interrupt me when I'm filming, but you're so cute. So we're having kind of a moment for, racial conversations, and we talked a lot about Black Lives Matter and issues facing African Americans in America, and, I've had a lot of thoughts. And some of those thoughts are about race issues involving people from the Middle East in America and my relationship to that as a belly dancer. And I'm hoping that making this video will kind of call attention to some issues that are very near and dear to my heart, even if it is a little bit difficult to talk about some embarrassing stuff from my own past. But here we go. So first of all, I can't really explain the story without talking about kind of like my own history with this issue and my own background. So I was born in 1991, which means that I was 10 years old when 9/11 happened in 2001. And at the age of 10, you're kind of like just starting to get a sense of the world and your place in it, and that's where you kind of first start to get a more nuanced-ish understanding of current events and what's going on. But you're still like very kind of like naive. You haven't like lived as an adult yet. There's still a lot that you don't know and don't understand, and a lot of your information about how to perceive the world comes from your family, your teachers, what's immediately around you. Like, you kind of have to take people's word for it on how the world works. So after 9/11 happened, there was a lot of just bad sentiment about the Middle East. A lot of just, bad feelings going around. And I grew up in Orange County, which recently has, made headlines, and people have been calling it the Florida of California. And I don't disagree with that sentiment. It's a very conservative bubble in an otherwise very blue-leaning state. And I think the anti-Muslim, anti-Middle East sentiment was especially strong where I was. Maybe not as strong as in some parts of the country, but it was pretty strong. And I mean, frankly, without going into too much detail, I was exposed to some pretty ugly racism at a young age from within my own family. And as I got older, people educated me. I kind of started to realize, slurs are slurs. Outright racism is a bad thing. And I kind of like vowed to not be racist. But it takes a while to unpack that stuff. That sort of racism that you absorb as a child, some of it is really obvious, and you can kind of like cast it away if you have an open mind and you're willing to do so. But some of it really like embeds itself in there like a lot deeper, and it takes time to sort of like root it out and identify it and unpack it and figure out like a new perspective on these things. And so by the time I got to college, I was identifying as much more left-leaning, more progressive, and I had begun the process of unpacking these things, and I'd already gotten rid of like the obvious stuff. But I got to college, and I moved in my junior year to Santa Cruz. And if you're not familiar with Santa Cruz, it's a college town in Northern California, kind of like between Monterey and like Silicon Valley, San Francisco, all of that whole area. And it's known for being a hippie town. It's like predominantly white, especially, with increasing gentrification. That whole area is just getting more and more expensive. And, as a 20-year-old, when I moved there was this whole vibe of like veganism, organics, yoga, and like sort of new age spirituality. And I got like really into it. I mean, I'd kind of been interested in it before I got there, but then when I was sort of like in this incubator of all those different kind of philosophies, I got really into it. And I don't know how I got interested in belly dancing. I'd never really been exposed to it when I was younger, but I just kind of like got this idea, like, I want to try belly dancing. Like, I had never even taken a dance class, really. I mean, I done like cotillion, like partner dancing when I was a kid, but I never done like, I didn't do ballet when I was a kid or anything. I was like very bookish. I just like stayed indoors and read, and I wrote Phantom of the Opera fan fiction in my journals at night. Stuff like that. But I got this idea, you know, I want to try belly dancing. And I was hanging out with one of my close friends, and I mentioned it to her, and she was like, oh, you know, I saw this show pretty recently, this band called Beats Antique, and they had a belly dancer. And she was like, so amazing, so cool, you should check them out. And I did. And Beats Antique is a band from, I believe, San Francisco. They're super huge in the Bay Area. Like, they're pretty well known everywhere, but in the Bay Area, they're like huge. And the belly dancer she was referring to is named Zoe Jakes. She tours with the band, and I believe she does some of the arrangements of the music. And when I looked her up, her style of dance was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was super fluid and powerful, and she had these amazing body isolations and connection to the music. And she danced to this music that was so different from what I'd heard before. Beats Antique is sort of like difficult to classify, I guess, like world fusion maybe. They bring together a lot of cultural influences and electronic influences, and they have like a pretty unique sound, but they're really, really popular in the belly dance world. Like, I've seen so many belly dance performances to Beats Antique. I honestly like got a little bit sick of hearing their music, even though like I generally like their music. I'm a little bit sick of hearing it so many times. But when I saw Zoe Jakes, it really like sparked something in me. Like, you know, I started like kind of watching videos of belly dancers on YouTube before I really started taking classes myself. So I saw some more like traditional, I guess, more like ethnic style belly dancers, like non-fusion dancers, mainly Ala Kushnir and Sadie. And I kind of checked out their style, but I really got into like tribal fusion, like more and more into that, because I was like, so cool the way they like, you know, fuse these like modern electronic elements and like all these different dance styles. And like tribal fusion dancers look different than I don't really know what to call it, like non-fusion dancers, like Egyptian style dance, American cabaret style dance, more the styles that like people in the Middle East watch and enjoy. So I'm editing my footage together right now, and I realized I was like really struggling a lot with that term. The word that I was looking for is cabaret. In the tribal world, you would say, I'm a tribal dancer, or you would say, you know, that's cabaret dancing. And the reason that I was struggling so much to remember that is because that's not really a term that applies to me in my everyday life. There's so many different varieties of belly dancing, of which tribal style is only one of them. And I never really see a need to try to put all these different belly dance styles under a single umbrella, nor do I think it's especially useful to do so. So that's why I was struggling to think of it in the heat of the moment, just an FYI. I identified more with the tribal dancers because they had tattoos. They had this like whole kind of hippie situation going on, and I really identified with that. I was like, these people seem more like me. And so I really started to like want to be a tribal fusion dancer. So basically like what tribal fusion is, it's partially like an aesthetic. They wear a certain type of costume. They'll use like kind of like Afghani style jewelry pieces and sew them into their costumes. They're usually more like neutral colors, a little bit less like sparkly and like brightly colored than the tribal fusion styles of dance. And beyond that, they often dance to like electronic music or more like world fusion music, which often includes like elements of Indian music that's really popular, like sitar and then the tabla, the Indian resonant drum. You know, it might include like elements of Middle Eastern music, but generally it's not Middle Eastern music that they dance to. And they'll include like belly dance moves, but also they'll include more like body isolations, maybe more like hip hop moves or like classical Indian dance, Balinese. It could be a lot of things. And I will say, like, I'm not trying to trash talk tribal fusion as like a whole genre of dance, but I will say there's some problematic stuff in the tribal fusion world. You kind of start to notice after a while that like Middle Eastern people don't really like that style of dance like as much. They don't really go to those kinds of shows. They don't really follow those types of dancers. It's really predominantly white audiences and white dancers that get into this style. And I mean, I don't think that's inherently wrong. You know, I'm trying not to like drag specific people, but there are tribal fusion dancers that get into it specifically because it does not require you to learn about Middle Eastern music and culture. It kind of allows you to skirt around that, and you can do, you know, some like goddess Shakti moves, and you can dance to your favorite like dubstep or whatever, but you're completely circumventing the fact that it's an ethnic dance, which is not a great look. It's really not a great look for white dancers, and it is mostly white dancers. And you know, that's not something I really was in a position to think about when I first started getting into it. I just was not educated enough about these topics at the time to really think critically in the way that I do now. So I just kind of was like, these are really cool dances. I like this music. I listen to this music already. Like, what's the problem? It's really cool. And I thought it was because it was so different and so inventive, but I gradually came to realize that I wasn't into it because it was different. I was into it because it was familiar to me, because it had these elements that were so familiar to me as a white American woman. You know, like the music that I was familiar with, the styles of dance that just kind of like appealed to me with my cultural background. And the reason I was less drawn to dancers that dance in the style that like Middle Eastern people actually enjoy, that's like more traditional, I wasn't drawn to it because that felt different and foreign to me. You know, the word Islamophobia gets thrown around a lot, and there has been a lot of prejudice against the Muslim faith since 9/11 and before it as well. But I think that term kind of like overshadows just the general rejection of Middle Eastern culture that has been taking place since 9/11. And, you know, Arabic music was so foreign to me at the time that I started getting into belly dancing. Like, I didn't know how to relate to it. I didn't know what I was listening to. It didn't connect with me. The movements, like, to people from the Middle East, they see those movements on like Ala Kushnir and Sadie, and like they relate to it in a way that I couldn't as someone that just didn't know anything about this dance and about that culture. And honestly, I was on a path to like just, you know, go full tilt cultural appropriation, but I frankly got really lucky because I just Googled belly dance teacher Santa Cruz or whatever, and I just went through the results to find someone that was like in my price range and close to where I was. And I just kind of stumbled into my teacher Janelle's class, and she ended up being not only my first teacher, but my main teacher for my first few years of belly dancing. And Janelle is awesome. Her kind of like whole mission statement is like, if you take my class, you're learning about Middle Eastern music, you're learning about like what movements are appropriate in what situations, like you're learning all this cultural context for the belly dancing. Like that's a prerequisite if you want to be studying with her. And I'm so lucky that I had that, because if I'd gone to like one of those other Google results, I might not have had that backbone that kind of gave me the tool set I needed to really recognize and question my own prejudice and my own colorblind racism that I had going on at that time. And, you know, maybe it doesn't sound like that much when I describe it, but it wasn't just the belly dancing. It was also like, you know, wanting to wear bindies, and, you know, I was really into yoga. You know, I would burn like white sage and Palo Santo, and I'd be like, oh, I'm smudging to purify the space. It was a lot of different ways that I was sort of treating other cultures as like a prop and not really like fully understanding and respecting them. And like, it wasn't just me. This is an attitude that was really prevalent with like white hippie kids in Santa Cruz, and it still is. And not just in Santa Cruz, but I see it all over the place. I see it on social media. It's so prevalent still. And like a lot of people just still aren't really thinking about it. They're like, what, how is it racist? Like I love Indian people. I love wearing bindies, you know? Like what's wrong with that? But it's like, these cultures are not a fashion statement. You know, if you don't understand what the larger context is, then it's not appreciation, it's appropriation. And this rejection of Middle Eastern culture is just, it's still so like pervasive in America. And I just still feel like we really are not having good conversations about it. Like, the Aladdin remake came out in 2019, and it had like a Bollywood dance number in the middle of it. Like, this is supposed to take place in the Middle East, and like, that was a choice. That was a choice. And, you know, this is an issue that obviously people that want to be belly dancers have to learn about and confront. But also, I see it as an issue within audiences as well. So if you're interested in watching belly dance, I think it's still worth learning about, even if you don't want to be a professional dancer, or if you're a dancer and you just want to be a hobbyist, even if it's just like your fun thing that you do to unwind after work. I still think you really need to be learning about these issues, because it affects all of us. And to both dancers and audience members, I would say, like, if you can't relate to Middle Eastern music, if more traditional dance styles, like if you don't relate to them as much, but you like the skimpy costumes, if you like the shaking your boobage action, like, think about that. Why do you want the sexy but not the culture? It's something I had to think about, and it was uncomfortable. It didn't really feel very good when I was kind of owning up to that inside myself. It was a really uncomfortable feeling, but you have to confront it. You know, ignoring it doesn't make it better. It doesn't help at all. You really have to do that work of unpacking it and understanding it. You know, there's such a long, rich history of Orientalism, which, if you're confused about the term Orientalism, the term Oriental in history has described both the Middle East and Southeast Asia. So yes, it is very confusing, but by Orientalism, I mean kind of the fetishization of the Middle East, specifically women of the Middle East, you know, the harem fantasy, all that stuff. You know, there's such a rich history of wanting this, like, basically sexual fantasy, but not actually wanting the culture and the history and just, you know, this vibrance of what the Middle East actually is. And it's still alive and well, you know, it's something we talk about in the context of history, but it's still going on. We still want the sexy, and we still, you know, just kind of hold the actual culture at arm's length. And you guys, we need to stop. We really need to stop. And so at this point, you might be asking yourself, Well, what can I do? What action can I take? I hope that's the question you're asking, because that was kind of like the point of this video. And I thought about, maybe making a list, but another belly dancer that I really admire named Patia, who's based out of the Bay Area, wrote a really amazing article that already had a really great list of ways you can help and take action with this issue. So I'm just going to read her list, and I'll link the full article in the description. I definitely recommend checking it out because she has a ton of great information in there. Some of Patia's suggestions for countering cultural appropriation include attending classes taught by people from that culture and supporting their growth, attending screenings of movies, cultural celebrations, concerts, art galleries, book signings, etc. of artists from that culture, involving people from that culture in your artwork, asking them for feedback on your artwork, and interviewing them on your podcasts and blogs. Taking classes to learn the language and music of that culture. Teaching, writing, audio, video recording, and documenting scholarly work on that culture. Sponsoring other artists or movement experts from that country or culture by assisting them in traveling to your country, allowing them to stay in your home, inviting them to teach with you, and or inviting them to create art with you. Traveling to that country and providing free classes on your culture or other types of classes, for example, free English language classes, ballet classes, etc. And finally, organizing educational tours to that country with local tour guides. So some of these are specific to dancers and some of these are more general for everyone. I would say as an audience member, it's really important, even if you're not studying belly dance yourself, to go to performances by Middle Eastern dancers, the types of shows that Middle Eastern people want to go to. You'll get more of a sense of the culture that way than you would if you just go to shows that have like only white dancers and only white audiences. And it's an ongoing process. It's something that I feel really clear that I want to work on, but I'm aware that I haven't necessarily confronted all of my own internal biases yet. It's something I'm gonna continue to work on for years to come, and just have an open mind and just keep that commitment alive to doing the best that I can and listening to criticism that might come my way. And for me, with all the Black Lives Matter stuff that's been going on, this commitment has sort of evolved because I've seen Black belly dancers speaking out about their experiences and gigs that they've been passed over for because they didn't want a Black dancer, they wanted a white dancer. Even in the Middle East, white dancers are taking over the scene. At this point, the most famous belly dancer in Egypt who's from Egypt is Dina. But other than that, a lot of the most famous dancers are from Russia or Ukraine. This is in part because of the obstacles that Egyptian women face when going into the profession of belly dancer. Even though in many ways Egyptian culture reveres belly dancers, including them in a lot of their events, especially weddings, belly dancers are looked down on. As Dina said in a 2018 interview with the New York Times, "Love and hate. It's always been like this. Egyptians cannot have a wedding without a belly dancer. But if one of them marries your brother, oh my God, that's a problem." Women that choose to become belly dancers are looked down on as having loose morals or being scandalous. And so there are obstacles for Egyptian women who want to become belly dancers that aren't present in the same way for foreigners who become belly dancers. So in that way, women that are not from the Middle East have a certain advantage because they're viewed more as artists and not judged by the same cultural criteria that an Egyptian woman would be. And that was another uncomfortable moment because even in the Middle East, they favor white dancers over Middle Eastern dancers. Dancers that are actually from Egypt have a harder time getting hired in Egypt. And it's an uncomfortable feeling. When I got started with belly dancing, I always kind of assumed that I would be passed over for gigs compared to dancers that were actually Middle Eastern, and I found out that that's not the case. And I honestly would have preferred to be passed over than to be prioritized as a white dancer. It makes me feel uncomfortable, but you don't have to want privilege to have privilege. That's not how it works. You just have to kind of be aware of it and do what you can to use your voice and your privilege to help dismantle the system that passes over people of color. And, I kind of assumed that since belly dancing was like an ethnic dance form, I kind of assumed that all dancers would be really like tolerant and good about race stuff. But actually, I've seen some dancers really come out in some racist ways as we started talking more about Black Lives Matter. And I kind of had to make a call that I'm not going to dance in shows anymore that are organized by racist dancers. I'm not going to collaborate with dancers that have racist viewpoints. And, that cost me like some opportunities in my career, but what I've traded that for is the dancers that are really actively speaking out about racism right now. We're sort of like taking note of each other and sort of forming new community lines that are based around like tolerance and dismantling privilege and all of that, which is really good. Like it's not really a sacrifice to me to like let go of these racist connections in my career. And I just kind of like wanted to say as a final like aside on this issue, something I think a lot about these days is like, I'm really lucky. I was super, super broke at the time that I was kind of like having my like hippie goddess Shakti cultural appropriation moment. I couldn't afford to be like as culturally appropriative as I wanted to be. And I really wasn't on social media at the time. Like I was a super late adopter of smartphones. I only really got on social media because I had to for work. And, I think a lot about like how I could have, if I had been, more decked out in my little like bindi harem pants, whatever moment, and I'd been on social media, maybe like people really would have like come after me. Like I could have gone viral. I could have been one of those like young white hippie girls that gets kind of like roasted by the entire internet. And so I kind of have like a slightly different perspective. Like obviously I think there's really valid and necessary criticism of these young people. But, we each have like a limited amount of energy every day to speak out against injustices in our culture. And I feel like it's really important to save that energy for like the most important and the most like value producing criticisms. And so like, sometimes I'll see, like, for example, a couple of years ago, there was this 16-year-old girl that found, like, a traditional Chinese dress at a thrift store and wore it to prom. And she posted the pictures to Twitter. It went viral. And a couple days later, like, I found it, and so many people were, like, dogpiling the 16-year-old girl, like, adults dogpiling the 16-year-old girl. And, like, like I say, I think she was kind of treating this traditional ethnic clothing as like a fashion accessory. And I do think there was valid criticism in there, but like, I think it stops being a value producing conversation at a certain point when everyone's just like kind of dogpiling her, and it kind of becomes about like vengeance and like this cathartic righteousness at a certain point. And, I decided not to like post about it or engage in this conversation because I just kind of felt like there were other ways that I could be more helpful and make more of a difference and educate people better. And that's kind of why I'm not like making this video calling people out on, specific instances of cultural appropriation. I think it's more productive for me in this instance, to just kind of like talk about my own experiences and my own journey through this. And I hope that it will help encourage a conversation that's productive, that actually like, gets people questioning their own internalized prejudice. And, I have a really big pet peeve for people that like have more to say about cancel culture than like actual issues of systemic racism. So I'm not trying to like take down cancel culture, but I do think it's something, that you might want to think about when you call people out or criticize them for cultural appropriation, or situations where young people are maybe not being like overtly racist, but, are being inappropriate because they don't know better, because like they're really young, they have a lot that they're still learning, hopefully some of them will, you know, kind of like hear these conversations and will examine themselves and grow out of it. But yeah, like it's worth considering what's productive to call out and criticize versus, you know, the short-lived feeling of catharsis that doesn't actually make a difference in the long term, you know? Just food for thought. But yeah, like if you're considering belly dancing and you're not interested in educating yourself about it as an ethnic dance, like maybe belly dance isn't the dance form you want to be getting into. Maybe there's another dance style that'll, you know, give you your goddess embodied free-flowing kind of vibe that you want to have without, you know, bulldozing a cultural tradition in your process, you know? And if you are interested in being a belly dancer, like that's awesome. That's so great. Like we're happy to have you. Just like be ready to do that work. Be ready to like really examine your own internal prejudice, your own biases, and work through it. And like, listen, it is hard. Like, I'm not trying to make light of the fact that like, this is really hard work. Like, I've done a lot of different types of art throughout my life. Like, I just have a lot of different things that I'm interested in. And I gotta say, like, belly dancing is like the hardest thing I've ever done. Like, you know how hard it is? Do you know how hard it is to be like a white American dancer showing up at like a gig where you're supposed to be dancing for like Middle Eastern people and try to like be a representative of a culture that you're not part of? Like there's certain music that's appropriate in certain situations. There's certain movements that are supposed to go with each type of music. There's certain ways to interact with each guest. Like it's so complicated and you're such an outsider. Like it is such an uphill battle. And I get why people want to circumvent that and just kind of, you know, stay in the safe zone of dancing to music that you're already familiar with and just dance for white audiences that are already from your culture. Like it's definitely an easier path, but like it's not the right path. So, you know, just food for thought. Let's try to have a little more respect for the Middle East, because like Americans, we're not doing so good. We're not doing so good in that department. So yeah, that's just kind of like what I have to say about that. Just a lot of things that I've been thinking about lately. If you have thoughts about this, I would love to hear what you have to say in the comments. This is just such an interesting topic and a topic that does not get talked about enough, I think. So kind of slightly heavy. You know, subscribe if you want. Sometimes heavy and uncomfortable topics like this, and sometimes more fun things like vintage toy videos and stuff like that. But I hope you guys have a really lovely rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video.